Partly because I wanted to move from problems and confrontation politics to consensus and finding solutions, and partly because my fellow Greenpeace International directors were beginning to adopt positions I couldn't accept. None of them had any formal science education. I mean, I don't hold that against them. They were like political activists, social activists. They didn't understand enough about the complex science issues we were starting to deal with in terms of chemicals and biology and agriculture. And they began to adopt positions that I couldn't accept, so I had to leave. And when I left, I was determined I would build an environmental policy organization that would base its positions on science and logic rather than on misinformation, sensationalism, and fear, which too much of today's environmentalism, what I call pop environmentalism, is based on. So Green Spirit Strategies is that vehicle that we use today to try to deliver a more science-based environmentalism towards the idea of sustainability. And in particular, we make sure that we recognize the real needs of 7 billion people on this planet. Also, too much of environmentalism almost ignores the fact that there's people, or sort of, you feel like they think it was better if there weren't any people, that nature would be better off without us, instead of recognizing that we are part of nature and we're also part of the solution. We can't possibly replace 85% of the world's energy, which is what fossil fuels amounts to. We can't replace that in 10 years. We couldn't do that in 30 years. We probably can't do that in 100 years. We're going to be using fossil fuels long into the future. What we should be doing is figuring out ways to first stop the growth of the use of fossil fuels, and then try and figure out how we can reduce the use of fossil fuels by building technologies and adopting technologies that don't use as much fossil fuel or don't use fossil fuel at all. For example, ground source heat pumps or geothermal heat pumps. When you put a geothermal heat pump into a building, you replace the gas furnace, the gas hot water heater, and a more efficient air conditioning system than you had with the conventional system. All three of those things with one piece of technology that is very cost effective and uses renewable energy from the earth. Sweden, for example, has 90% penetration of geothermal heat pumps into new residential construction. In Canada, it's 3%. There's no difference between the climates of Sweden and Canada particularly. We're both wealthy industrial countries. If Sweden can afford to put 90% of their houses with geothermal, we can too. Solar power is not a positive thing on the grid as it is being applied in the industrialized countries today, Ontario being the classic case. They're paying 80 cents a kilowatt hour for solar power there, when the standard rate is 7.5 cents. So how much solar power at 80 cents can you put into the system without that 7.5 cents starting to go up quite a bit? Sustainability is also got to do with economic sustainability. And driving people into energy poverty is not a sustainable practice. But that's what solar panels will do if we keep on building them. Like, how are 24-hour, 7-day-a-week factories going to run on solar panels and windmills? It's simply not possible. And yet they sell the misinformation that it is. And people buy it. And we've got to get over that. We have to expose it. We should be focusing on the tremendous additional hydroelectric resources there are in Canada. But Greenpeace and Suzuki are against dams. And we should be focusing on the fact that nuclear energy could be put anywhere in this country because we have 1/3 of the world's uranium supply that is being produced today coming out of Saskatchewan. Why aren't we using more nuclear energy here instead of using fossil fuels, for example? But the wind and solar thing is just a bubble. It's almost over, actually. The Conservatives have pledged they will scrap the whole thing because it's a phony little economic bubble that is making a few people very wealthy at the expense of every ratepayer in the province. In many cases, there is no other way to do it, and GM is not only affordable, it makes money, and that's why the farmers want the seeds. But it also can work miracles. The environmental movement, with the organic movement conspiring with them, Their opposition towards genetic modified crops is one of the main crimes against humanity that is occurring in this world today. Because the big crops like cotton and soybeans and corn have been able to break through the opposition because there's billions of dollars and they're big export crops. But the crops that have to do with ending malnutrition, like golden rice, fortified crops that will have vitamin E, iron, vitamin A, and amino acids that are lacking, like lysine, those have not been able to break through Greenpeace's barriers that they've put up, especially in the developing world. The World Health Organization estimates between 250,000 and 500,000 children go blind every year in the rice-eating cultures because of vitamin A deficiency. Golden rice will cure that overnight. It has been stalled for 13 years since it was invented by Dr. Ingo Potrykus, the Swiss government scientist humanitarian who figured out how to put genes from corn into rice so that the rice put beta-carotene into the kernel, into the grain. On the environmental movement's part, the opposition to GMO is pure misinformation, disinformation, if you want to put it. They are purposefully lying about this so-called negative aspects of GMOs. There isn't one single demonstrated problem with GMOs regarding human health or the environment. As a matter of fact, it's all good. It's better. It's more nutritious. It uses less pesticides. It results in higher productivity. These are good things, and yet they are portrayed as somehow almost like evil, as if there's some evil thing inside this genetic food.